Here is a live look at the Atlanta headquarters for Senators Loeffler and Perdue tonight. If you're a Georgia voter, you have just under an hour to get in line at your polling place or to drop off your absentee ballot by 7 p.m. The stakes could not be much higher for these two elections. The results will determine the balance of power in our nation's capital as the country enters the Biden era. Democrats have to win both of these runoffs to reach a 50-50 Senate split. That would make Vice President-elect Kamala Harris the tie-breaking vote and give their party control of the White House and both chambers of Congress for the first time in a decade. But if either Republican incumbent can secure another term, Republicans will narrowly hold the Senate, extending Mitch McConnell's time as majority leader. Here's how the candidates made their final pitch to voters today.
Georgia voters have never had more power than you have today. That's the reason the whole world is watching us in Georgia. That's the reason everybody needs to get out to the polls and make their voices heard.
If you voted in November, whatever you feel about the efficacy of this election process in Georgia, and it does have some problems, and we will get that fixed. We can't do much until after this election, unfortunately, but if you voted in November, please get out and vote. Your children, grandchildren are going to look back on this day and remember how we handled ourselves today.
We have two United States senators in Georgia who are aiding and abetting the effort to literally rob the people of their voices and their votes. I think that's outrageous. The good news is that the people of Georgia have a chance to do something about that right now.
The future of the country is on the ballot here in Georgia today. There's a stark contrast, the path of the American dream that I've been fighting for, or socialism. My opponent.
Nikole Killion and Adam Brewster join me now. Nikole is a CBS News correspondent with President-elect Biden in Delaware, and Adam is a CBS News reporter covering the campaign from Cobb County, Georgia. Welcome and Happy New Year to you both. Adam, let's get right to it. We have some new exit poll numbers giving us a look at the electorate for these runoffs. They currently show that 39% identify as Republicans, 36% of Democrats, 62% of voters are white, 29% black, 37% of voters have a college degree compared to 63% who did not. What can we take away, Adam, from this compared to the picture of the electorate that we saw from the early vote?
Well, Georgia doesn't have party registration, so those are some, new, harder numbers, and, it's an exit poll, and it doesn't give us an exact difference on that. Now, through the early voting, we had seen higher turnout in some of the Democratic areas compared to some of the more solidly Republican areas, especially in northern Georgia, around where the president was last night. But the theory had been that many Republicans were still going to show up on Election Day and show up in big numbers, and relatively soon that question will be answered. We had seen about a third of the electorate, a little higher percentage through the early voting, was identified as black voters compared to the number from the exit poll, slightly lower there, closer to what we saw in November. And I think that one other number that's going to be key to watch is more than 100,000 people through those early voting did not vote in November and voted during these January runoffs. That was during the early voting period. I met 2 people today. That's just anecdotal, but we have seen that it is, about 4% of the electorate overall. One woman who was voting for the Democrats and said this was her second chance to go out there and make a difference. One person who said he hadn't voted in 30 years. He felt a little bit of a nudge, I think, from his partner to get out there and vote, but he felt it was important to have his voice heard.
Well, and Adam, our viewers may have noticed that Republican Senator David Perdue's clip a moment ago was from a remote television interview. That's because he's isolating after coronavirus exposure. How has that impacted the final days of this campaign?
Well, it certainly wasn't ideal timing, right? The news came out just before Senator Perdue was supposed to be at an event with Senator Loeffler, and Senator Lindsey Graham came down from South Carolina to campaign on New Year's Eve. Just northeast of Atlanta, about an hour northeast. And since then, we haven't seen him on the campaign trail, and he's been stuck doing media interviews as his way of getting his message out. Now, we know that, more than 3 million people had already voted through the end of early voting period, and there was still a sizable chunk. Senator Perdue certainly had help. His cousin Sonny, former governor of Georgia and U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, was out on the campaign trail with other Republicans. And, of course, the big one last night, President Trump rallying thousands of people in Dalton, Georgia, in northwest Georgia, an area that is critical for Republicans.
And Nikole, how much of the Biden agenda rides on these runoffs?
Well, look, a lot of it does. Really, the bulk of the president-elect's agenda rides on this, and he said as much today in a series of radio interviews that he did down in Georgia remotely. He said, look, by having people like, for instance, Jon Ossoff, Raphael Warnock in the Senate, that they will give him the authority or help give him the authority to do things that he would like to do. And one example he pointed to, for instance, is his vaccination distribution plan, which he has said will be probably one of the biggest, if not the single most difficult challenge that his incoming administration will face, especially given some of the hurdles we've seen in the current distribution program. And he has made clear that he wants this to be an expansive program, that he wants this to be accessible, that he wants to, for instance, have vaccination centers set up around the country, and he doesn't want people to have to pay for it. That's going to require funding from Congress. We've also heard him, for instance, talk about his plan to reopen schools, which again will be contingent on getting funding from Congress. So certainly having both of those Democrats in the Senate will infinitely make getting those types of big ticket agenda items much easier for the president-elect if Democrats get in versus Republicans if they are to stay in control.
Well, Adam, you're speaking to us from a polling place in Cobb County in the Atlanta suburbs. How important is that area for Democrats' hopes of winning these races?
Atlanta and the metro area is really where, this election could be won and lost for the Democratic candidates. It was huge for President-elect Biden when he narrowly won this state. Of course, Fulton County, home to Atlanta, and DeKalb County, those are the, two lifebloods of Democratic votes. They're two of the biggest counties. Two of the big suburban counties, though, in Atlanta, here in Cobb and over in Gwinnett County, those were solidly Republican counties. They voted for Mitt Romney by large numbers 8 years ago. In this past election, we saw President-elect Biden win them both by double digits. But the kicker is Jon Ossoff ran, behind President-elect Biden in both of these counties by a few points. And in a tight election, you need every vote you can get. The precinct that I'm at right now, in fact, is one that both President-elect Biden won and Senator David Perdue won, albeit by a very small margin, just a handful of voters. A lot of this will come down to how much of the base shows up, but if it is a close race, it is margins like that campaigns will certainly scrutinize.
Well, Nikole, these Senate races now rank as the first and second most expensive Senate races in U.S. history, according to data from the Center for Responsive Politics, which includes money spent leading up to November. Now, this comes in an election cycle with 9 of the 10 most expensive Senate races ever. How has the Biden team been investing in this race?
Well, we know, according to a campaign official, that they've steered at least $18 million to the candidacies of both Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock to try to help them unseat Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue. And that is a range of fundraising, that is staff support, voter data support. And certainly that's just a fraction of what has been spent in this race overall from both parties, as you point out. But it is a sign that really they don't want to leave anything to chance. We, of course, saw the president-elect and the vice president-elect not only go to Georgia once, but twice. They've done robocalls. As I mentioned, they did a number of interviews in various media markets throughout Georgia today. So for them, from the transitions perspective, they don't want to leave any stone unturned. They want to reach out to as many voters as they can to, again, as we discussed earlier, try to get control of the Senate so that they can move forward with their agenda.
All right, Nikole Killion and Adam Brewster, great to see you both. Thank you so much. With Georgia's Senate